Hey, everybody. This is a podcast with somebody named Peter who is creating open source kits that help you adapt certain OLED TVs to use for 3D content like 3D Blu-rays or 3D games. And I was really excited to talk to him, so excited that we jumped right into the conversation without any intro. So I just wanted to give a quick intro here, but stick with us if you're interested in 3D at all, because we get into a lot of cool stuff. And we even ended up talking a lot after the podcast ended. So there's definitely going to be a follow-up in the future, but let's jump in and check out this podcast interview with Peter.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks for showing interest in the project. So basically, it's available. The details are all available on the GitHub website. So it's Open3DOLED slash open-3D-OLED on GitHub. And basically, where this came from was I've been interested in watching 3D movies and playing 3D games for a while. I kind of, there was a period of time where I didn't have a fast enough computer to really play 3D games. So I kind of fell out of I don't know what you want to call it, but like there's that whole Helix mod community of guys who are making mods to play 3D games. But I was never really in
Right.
that because I didn't have a fast enough computer to really do it for a while. So
Mm-hmm.
what happened was I kind of went away from 3D. And then about, 4 years ago, I just thought to myself, I've got this LG OLED TV, which does 120 hertz. I wonder if I could make it do 3D. So it was an LG C1 OLED. And I didn't realize at the time that it was going to be very important that it was an LG C1 OLED because that was one of the few TVs that this would actually work with.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I did was I started off with I already had a pair of NVIDIA, what do they call it? I'm trying to remember the name of it. The 3D glasses
Oh,
that they used to
I could
make.
picture it in my mind. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. What's it called? 1 second. We'll look it up. But anyways, the NVIDIA 3D glasses with the little pyramid, the black pyramid emitter. And I actually had
Right.
one of those at home. And I thought, so I looked online and it looked like there might have been a way to get it to work with any display by basically, if you had a compatible video card, which at that time needed to be a 20 series or earlier, because I think it was 3 years ago when I did this at first. And you also needed to make a custom CRU ToastEX resolution profile for your display.
Mm-hmm.
And you also needed to put these special hacked drivers in to get the pyramid to run. And then you
Mm-hmm.
had to adjust the timings on the pyramid to work with your particular monitor. And I started down that path. And I have actually met people subsequently who are successfully able to get it working with their TV, but I wasn't able to get it working initially. And I thought, well, that's a shame because it looks like the TV should be able to do this. So what I thought is well, what if I were to make a device, which I'll just grab it, which I've got on my other monitor here, which has two light sensors on it. It's kind of hard to see them, but it kind of hooks over the top of your monitor like this. And it's
Mm-hmm.
got two light sensors on the inside. And I thought, well, what if I just put into the video feed a very like a very discrete kind of two little pixels or two little blocks of light at the top of the screen, which light up indicating whether it's the left or right eye.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can use that to trigger the glasses off of. Because one of the key issues with doing 3D video is that NVIDIA's kind of most video companies, AMD and NVIDIA both have done it. They've artificially restricted the ability to output page flipped video. So page flipped 3D content. So page flipped 3D content is sort of temporally sequenced 3D, where the left eye goes out in one frame and the right eye goes out in the other frame.
Yeah,
And
actually, I think this is sorry to interrupt, but I think a good idea would be to pause and kind of just describe what 3D is from the perspective of like 3D Blu-rays and games on your PC and exactly what you're talking about now, and kind of just break it down that way so people
okay,
understand what we mean by 3D. Because depending on your age, you could remember those red and green glasses or red and blue
yeah.
glasses, or
Okay. Like I mean So if you're asking about 3D specifically, so I mean, there's different things people want to do with 3D. This is kind of before the VR era. Once VR came, that's introduced a whole lot of new things that are really actually quite interesting. But historically, there was video content. So 3D Blu-rays they are a special type of Blu-ray where there's actually two video streams encoded into the Blu-ray. And I don't want to go too deep into that, but it's actually kind of unfortunate that they're made that way, because the codec that they use to make the 3D Blu-rays, there is no open source version that is available to be integrated into players like FFmpeg and GStreamer and stuff like that. So the
Mhm.
only codec that's available to play 3D Blu-ray content that's a software codec is one that's made by Intel, which doesn't work in Linux and other open source operating systems. It only runs under Windows, which is why if you want to play 3D Blu-rays, which are encoded with MVC 3D content, your only real options are things like Pot Player and Media Player Classic Black Edition, because they're the only ones that can hook into this Intel codec to play it. And if the other, so that's the only way to do it with a software decoder. But if you want to play sort of 3D videos, the only other option you have is hardware decoders. So like the Raspberry Pi 3B has a hardware decoder for MVC 3D Blu-ray content, but none of the newer ones do, because 3D content is kind of dying off, at least in the mainstream. So you have a very hard time finding any hardware devices that can play it that are PC based or computer based. So it's, and even modern Blu-ray players, sometimes they don't support it depending on when they're made. So anyway, so there's the video aspect of it, and that came with its whole, the way the 3D Blu-ray players would output the video was, if it was designated for a TV, like a device like a TV, it would use a special format, which is actually just a custom resolution with
Mhm.
special flags on the video stream to kind of indicate that this is 3D video content. And it's very hard to find monitors or TVs. There's virtually no modern TVs or monitors that will accept that sort of stacked vertical. So what it is it's a stacked 1080p plus 1080p with a band in the middle with a custom resolution. But even if you force that, like from your computer, it won't play on the older TVs because it needs these special flags included in the stream. So it's all these proprietary technologies that are kind of stacked on top of one another, and now no one wants to support them anymore. So in terms of video playback, it's really a pain in the butt to try to, I don't know, get an open source system working that will let you play this content. If
Mm.
you, yeah, there's some off the
So that's
shelf.
actually a yeah, that's a great explanation as to why there aren't a ton more ways to view 3D content, because
Yeah,
I never really knew that about the proprietary Intel stuff, because I just always thought it was a
yeah,
little simpler than that. But interesting.
yeah. I mean, like the way most people do it, once they've given up on playing 3D Blu-ray content from sort of the MVC encoded H.264 video content, because they just can't find a way to do it, is they use
Mhm.
something called side by side or top and bottom, where basically what someone's done is they've taken these Blu-rays or they've taken this other source video material from somewhere, and they basically just encoded it into a left eye and a right eye in one video. And
Mm.
there's different versions of this. So there's something called half side by side, where basically
Mm.
they take the 1080p and the 1080p left and right eyes, they put them side by side, and then they cut the resolution in half. So it's still only a 1080p video. And that's one of the more common ways you'll find video online. They also have the top and bottom variant, but I don't,
Right.
most people who like to watch the videos and want the high quality versions, they don't really like the half ones because you're losing half the resolution. And even if you're going to go with the full side by side or full top and bottom, which keeps the full resolution, you still need to have the video transcoded, which means you're
Right.
the real, picky people. They're going to think, well, I'm going to get more, what's it? You get those kind of blockiness kind of
Right.
artifacts and gradient and
Banding and
stuff.
compression artifacts and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the people who really want to do it, they're basically limited to either using a hardware player like a ZDO or a Dune HD, but it's only the older Dune HDs and the older ZDOs. The new ones don't support it because they need older Qualcomm chips that have this hardware MVC decoder built in to
Mm.
actually play the 3D Blu-ray video content as it was. So it's kind of like the only option you have is really Pot Player and Media Player Classic Black Edition to actually play the videos on a PC if you want to have it run on one of these other new monitors, which is where it all starts. So like my software that I made initially, I still can't do the MVC content because I built my software to be run under Windows and Linux, and there is no uh, decoder that I can actually hook into my software to play it. So one of the earlier beta testers I had basically said to me, you've got to make a plugin for Pot Player because that's the only way that he can watch these videos in the highest quality. So I thought, well, I better do that. So I made an AVI synth filter, which is a form of
Mhm.
kind of like a plugin that sort of packs the video a special way so that it kind of changes it a bit. But that's the video aspect. The gaming aspect of things is kind of totally different. But we can talk about that too. Um, like I said earlier, traditionally, I think Shutter. I think NVIDIA was one of the first companies that kind of brought out this. They called it ELSA 3D, I think originally, and they had the shutter glasses in the
Mhm.
90s, so you could use the GeForce video cards to play 3D games. Um, and it worked really well at that point in time because they were using CRT monitors, which, as you may
Right.
know, have really low persistence times. And
Right.
it's basically
Because it's
like,
drawing its image one beam of light at a time.
exactly,
And while there isn't as much detail as like a 4K TV, it's essentially each line that's drawn is like its own version of BFI, but you don't get the flicker because it's going so fast and so thin that you don't, it's not like looking at BFI on a TV. It's,
right?
in that way, there's zero persistence of vision. I mean, my audience already knows all this, but I'm sure
Yeah,
we're going to
no,
have new people,
but
listening. So,
this is where I really wanted to go with the conversation because this is like the most important part. It's that you need to have when you're doing this type of 3D. So there's different types of 3Ds. There's the anaglyph 3D where you've got the blue and the red glasses, and then there's other versions of that. Like there's even a version where they use these laser band stop filters where they have red, green, and blue filters for one lens and red, green, and blue filters for the other lens, and they're both off by about 10 nanometers wavelength of light. So you actually get RGB in one eye, RGB in another eye, and it's almost, I don't know if it's full HD, the full, the color triangle thing, but you're getting different color triangles, and they actually
mhm,
have one technique to do it with that too. But the most common way to do 3D in modern times is with shutter glasses or polarized glasses. And the
right.
shutter glasses are the preferred way when the display technology is compatible with it. But the big caveat with the shutter glasses is you need a display which has very low persistence times. The persistence time needs to be basically, it needs to start when the shutter glass is open, and the pixel needs to be going black when the shutter glasses are closing, because once the other eye opens, if there's any persistence due to slow pixel response times or anything like that, you'll basically get crosstalk between the left and the right eyes images, and it can cause problems. And that's why CRT technology was so ideal for shutter glasses, because you could even crank up the speed of the CRT to be have a lower resolution and be 120. The frequency you could output was basically limited by how fast your video card could push pixels, right? So
Right.
um,
Yeah, that's also why so many people think 3D was just a stupid fad and a gimmick, because if you're watching it on a bottom of the barrel LCD TV, it's going to look horrible. And
yeah,
I actually bought at Goodwill for $10 a little 32-inch TV that was also 3D compatible.
yeah,
And I use it just as a spare, but I bought the 3D glasses for it just so I could sit down and experience it. Because I started 3D on, well, CRTs back in the day, but plasma for the Blu-rays. And
yeah,
it was hilariously bad on the LCD. It
yeah.
was very, very good on the plasma,
I
but
bet
it
it
was
was. Yeah,
excellent on the OLED. I have a
yeah.
2016 LG OLED with the polarized screen, so it's the passive shutter glasses, but it still looks phenomenal.
Yeah, those LG passive glasses ones, they're like the creme de la creme displays. Unfortunately, they don't make them, and the cost of
No.
bundle if you can actually find one that doesn't have burn in. So it's kind of
Yeah.
yeah. But no, I know exactly what you're talking about with the killer for 3D. The thing that really destroyed it, I think, was when they went from using TN panels to VA panels and IPS panels in TVs, because the TN panels had a response rate that was fast enough, because the shutter glasses people use actually have TN, twisted pneumatic crystals, in them. So they're
Mm.
basically the same, speed at flipping, right? So the TN panels can actually do, I could be wrong about this, but I think they can do like 1 or 2 millisecond transitions to almost fully off to fully on, right? Whereas the
Mm.
VA, they do like 5 to 8 milliseconds is the best you can get out of them. And like I actually was in the market for buying a projector that could do 3D at one point. And I read all these rave reviews about how Epsons were really good and they didn't have the rainbow effect because they used LCD panels in them, right? And what I
Mm.
found out was when I bought this ultra short throw Epson projector, somewhere between 2013 and 2019, they switched from using IPS based technology to VA, vertically aligned like crystals in their LCD displays, and they had 4 times worse response times, and it had a minimum of like 10, I'd say 15 to 30% ghosting in every image. So when you're trying to watch a video, it just destroys it, because like what's supposed to be black starts showing all these like dots, and you get confused, and you can't really, I can't enjoy the video. Lots of people in the reviews said that the 3D was spectacular and there was no ghosting, but
No
it just
ghost, no
depends.
crosstalk is nice, but I had a BenQ projector that everything had a green tint to it. Now, it could be
So
that I was too cheap to buy a good projector screen, and that's, my garbage screen is what did it, but the whole thing was tinted green
was it only
and
when you watched 3D it was tinted green?
only 3D.
So the reason that is because the DLP link. So a lot of these BenQs, you may actually want to go back if you still have it, but a lot of
No.
you don't. Okay, so a lot of the projectors, they have 2 modes of 3D. One of them is called DLP link, which basically what
Mhm.
it does is it flashes a short pulse of light every frame, and it shifts it back and forth by about 100 microseconds. And that shifting back and forth is what tells the glasses whether it's the left eye or the right eye that they need to show. And the way that it does that pulsing is it normally just, if you're using a laser based projector, where it has, multiple different colors, they'll normally use green because it's one of the brighter colors that they have in the laser thing, right? I'm guessing your BenQ probably wasn't a laser because it was probably a, what do you call them, a halide, a xenon lamp type projector, right?
I had 2. I had the cheaper one that was not laser, and that's the one that definitely had the green tint, and then I
Yeah,
had the laser one, but I ended
yeah,
up having to return it for a million other reasons,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
ended up getting the 77-inch C4, not the G, the C4 OLED, which
Yeah.
overall was a better choice, but that's what actually led me to you, is I'm just going,
Okay,
I
okay,
could get another ultra short throw projector. I could even get a used 1080p one, and I'm sure it'll be fine, but can I figure out how to use this beautiful ass TV I
okay.
just
So
bought?
specifically for your LG C4, the problem with it is that they removed the 120 hertz BFI. Um,
Right.
now
So let's
yeah,
just pause real quick.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I speculate they've removed the 128 BFI
Well,
about.
yeah, hold on. Let's just pause for a second and just say that the way 3D works is for a 24p image, right? It's still 24 frames per second, but
Yeah.
it's 1 frame per eye, so it's essentially 48 frames per second, right?
Well, okay. So yeah. So the issue is, you are going. So it's 24p, right?
Right.
The movies, if you're watching movies, it's 24p. But in order so basically, if you were to flicker it alternating at 48 hertz, you would get
Very flickered.
yeah, you would get very uncomfortable. Like a lot of people would probably
Yeah.
throw up. I don't know how. I've tried to go as low as 60, and it makes me feel awful. Like,
Yeah.
and most of the glasses won't actually run at 60. Like I've actually had to modify the firmware on the glasses. So I reverse engineered the whatchamacallit, these Panasonic glasses, and I actually figured out how to make my own firmware for them so that I could do things like But anyways, I'll talk about that later. But basically, anyways,
Yeah,
so yeah,
and
so
just some context for people, running 3D at 60 frames per second is essentially like Master System and original Famicom 3D games, where it's 30 frames per second total because it's
yeah,
30 per eye, so you're locked. And that's pretty flickery. It's unique enough where it's a fun experience, but you're not going to
yeah,
game for hours and hours on that.
yeah,
And anybody that's watched the proper cadence video I did understands the flicker thing, but if not, I'll just leave a link for that. And I'm not going to get into that now, but yeah,
yeah,
48 hertz flicker. And in fact, anything that's a cadence of 24 is really, really hard to not have some crazy strobing that makes you feel like you're about to drop
yeah.
into an epileptic seizure. So, but
Yeah, like I actually, that's one of my main complaints with 3D movies is that they aren't smooth. But there is a pipeline to run it through SVP, so there is a
mhm.
way to actually put it through SVP and apply some of these newer Rife smoothing techniques. But I don't have a fast enough GPU to do it, so it's like, yeah, like I've got to wait till those 4080s, 4090s get down to be like, 500, $600, and then I'll buy one and try it. But
Yeah.
but the issue anyway.
So
So
anyway,
the
my interruption aside, I paused just to put the BFI and the flicker and everything into perspective. But for
yeah,
3D Blu-rays, so I interrupted you right at the point where we were talking about how they're technically 24 frame per second movies, and then so if
yeah.
you want to explain how that actually works from a
Okay,
refresh rate.
so the way it works is a lot of the so if we think of projectors, for example, the 3D projectors typically operate at 120 hertz or 144 hertz. The 144 hertz is preferable because the faster it's alternating, the less likely you are to see the flicker. And also, if it's at
Mhm.
144 hertz, that means you can have three frame for every frame or every frame of the 24 frames, you can have three of one eye and three of the other eye. If it's
Mhm.
120, you're getting three of and two, and then three and two, and then three and two, and it's going back and forth, which some people say can cause it to. I can't see the difference, honestly, but some people don't like it. So that basically means that you can't just use the 60 hertz BFI on your LG OLED C4 because I know it has 60 hertz BFI. You can use it, but it'll be so flickery that it probably will not make you feel good. Um,
Well, the BFI on this model TV, and I believe the last year's as well. I can't be sure, but this one, when you turn on BFI for any source, it automatically applies 3.2 pull down. So if you were to send it a 24p image, it would immediately go to 60, and then you would have 3.2 pull down off, 3.2 pull down off. So everything isn't like the cadence isn't going to look right.
okay, okay, yeah. Like I mean, in order to actually watch 3D on the TV, you've got to do
Mhm.
all that artificial. So that's what the pot player does in this particular case. Is it does the frame interleaving of the left and right eyes. So
Okay.
you can actually get it to do it at 60 hertz. And most of the glasses won't work at 60 hertz because they realize it's such a terrible experience. Like
Yeah.
Panasonic, they never made a display that would actually show 3D at 60 hertz. So the default firmware won't even let you do it, and the DLP ones are the same. I think the lowest they go is 90 hertz. So that's one issue. You won't like you'd have to get some really ancient glasses from back in the CRT days that would actually. I think the Nvidia ones might work, but this is one other thing that you have to contend with is the polarization angle on the glasses. Um, all the displays. So because they are shutter glasses and they're LCDs, they automatically have a polarizer in one direction and a polarizer in the other direction, right? And
Mhm.
so, for example, most TVs nowadays have I don't want to mix this up. I think it is a vertical front polarizer. I could be wrong. It might be horizontal. But, anyways, and the older NVIDIA ones, so a lot of the older monitors, the TN panels that were used for 3D gaming back in the day on monitors, they had a 45-degree front polarizer on the monitors, right? So if you go and use those NVIDIA glasses today with TVs, which you can do, you lose 50% of the light right off of the get-go
Mhm.
because the 45-degree polarizer is only letting half of it through to your eyes. So that's where you really want to have glasses that are made with the correct polarizer for your TV. And I've even found strange things like, for example, the 48 and what's the 50? I can't even remember. I think it's 50, 52 or 51 inch LG OLED.
50 inch.
50 inch. So yeah, so you got 40. This, anyways, the
42, 48, 50, 65, 77, 85.
Right. For some
80.
reason, the 65 inch, I actually figured it out why, but the 65 inch OLEDs, for some reason, they have a polarizer that's 90 degrees different from all the other ones. And I think it's because when they buy the polarizing film to put onto the displays, they want to maximize the film utilization. And they can fit 48-inch panels, this way, and they can fit the like 70, I don't even know, the 80-inch ones the same ways. But for some reason, they can get double the efficiency if they put the 65s in 90 degrees. So that means that none of the glasses will work unless you flip the lenses.
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay.
yeah. So, but these specific ones, you can't flip the lenses on easily. But the third generation Panasonic ones, you can flip the lenses on. It takes me about 45 minutes to flip the lenses on them for one pair. And normally I break one out of every 5 when I do it. So it's like another painful thing. But so it's just one of those things, like someone bought a kit from me and they bought 4 pairs of glasses and it arrived and he's like, I can't see anything. It's all black. And I'm like, because the polarizers on the 65 were all 90 degrees off. So it's another one of these things you got to check. So it's very, it's a maze. You've got to literally you got to check the polarizer. So I've got like a checklist for anyone who wants to try this stuff. You got to get a pair of polarizing sunglasses and look at your TV. If you can see the TV with the polarizing sunglasses, it means it's the correct polarization for 90% of the TVs, and the normal glasses will work. But if you can't see it, then you've got to flip the lens elements, or or use a 45-degree NVIDIA glasses and lose 50% of the light.
So I didn't know that at all about the polarization, which, if you bought a 3D TV and you bought glasses that were meant to match that, and then you plugged in a PlayStation 3 to play 3D games or a 3D Blu-ray to play those movies, you wouldn't have to think about it because everything was already together. But when you're forcing TVs that aren't 3D to do that, that's when all of this stuff happens.
Yeah.
So the one thing I'm still not quite grasping, though, is where does BFI come in to allowing this to work? Couldn't you just take a 144 hertz panel like that and send it 3 frames at a time and then just black out each eye when you do that?
Yes, you can. So if you've got like your audience is familiar with blur busters, right? And the persistent stuff and everything, right? So basically,
Mark is king to us.
Okay. So that was one of the key things I had to look into when I first started trying to get this 3D stuff working on LCD panels, because the OLED stuff wasn't so much of a problem. But basically, what the issue is you want BFI because it gets you more brightness. In OLED terms, it gives you more brightness. And the other thing BFI does is what you're looking for is you need the image. So how do I explain it? The shutter glasses will open for a period of time. And when the shutter glasses are open, you only want one eye's image to be on the screen. And when you aren't using BFI, what happens is it's like a rolling shutter. You guys are familiar with this. It basically goes from top to bottom, and it basically takes the last frame's image and it replaces it with the new one. And the period of time where only one eye's image is on the screen is only about, 20% of the frame time. And that's basically dictated by the vertical blanking interval, which is in the resolution profile. And if you look into sort of the blurbuster stuff where they talk about using quick frame transport, which is QFT HDMI, which basically what it is it's where they insert a large vertical blanking interval to basically make it so that the frame is static. So say you've got a 600 megahertz pixel clock and you're driving a 1080p display, and that means you could, if you wanted, drive it at 240 hertz. But if you drive it at 240 hertz, you're going to be getting a lot of whatevers, and your pixel response time may not be high enough to actually get a static image on the screen. So what they recommend on some of the blurbuster stuff is that you drive it at a slower speed and you use quick frame transport to basically pad out a large interval of the screen. So basically at the top of the scan out, you have your 1080p image, which gets delivered to the monitor immediately. And then below that, you have like another 1080p, or even, what would it be? 2160 lines of just blankness. And what that does
Mhm.
is it gets you your image at the top as fast as possible, and then it leaves that image on the screen in a static form for basically 3 frame, what would have been 3 frame intervals, right? And it's that interval of time where you've got the static image on the screen that you can open the glasses without getting ghosting. Now, okay,
Okay.
yeah. So the reason, so BFI doesn't really increase the vertical blanking interval, but what it does is it increases the brightness by a factor of 2.5 times for the period of time where it's scanning out, and it leaves the other portions black. So if you don't have BFI, you'll lose anywhere from 2.5 to 4 times the visible light that you would be able to get through the glasses.
And this is so just for anybody who's trying to follow who's not familiar, because anybody who tries BFI with video games, you immediately, like, let's just say 60 to 120 hertz, you immediately lose half the brightness. But in the context of what you're talking about, having this image being displayed the way you're saying to match the shutter glasses, you're gaining brightness.
It's not always the case that you lose half the brightness. It depends on the display technology. So with the LG OLED specifically, like, I've measured everything with photodiodes, and I can tell you that it's actually putting out 2 times the brightness at for that time interval, but it's only using a 33%, 37% persistence time. So you are losing about, I'd say, I might be wrong, but in my case, I lost about, I'd say, 25% of the brightness, but it's showing you, 75% of the brightness in 33% of the time. You know what I
That's an
mean?
excellent way to describe it. That's a way better way to. I'm going to totally steal that. That's an
but
excellent way
anyway,
to
so
describe it.
so that's why it's so valuable, because without having the BFI, um, you lose a lot of brightness, and you have to tweak your glasses timings in very specific ways to make it so it only opens for a very short period of time. And most of the firmware on these glasses by default won't actually let you only open it for a very short period of time, because they aren't designed to do that. Like, my custom
Hmm.
firmware will let you do that, but it's not, a lot of the glasses won't actually let you only open it for like 2 milliseconds of every 8.3 milliseconds frame time.
Hmm.
It just depends on which glasses you're using, whether the firmware will let you do it.
Now, when we're talking about adding this stuff, if you're relying on a TV's BFI, so for 120 hertz BFI, just a super oversimplification, that actually means that you're using a 240 hertz panel. However, it's usually the HDMI spec and the HDMI chips will only allow for what the maximum of that is, but the internal processing can be whatever the company wants it to be, and that's how you're able to get something like the older OLEDs. Odd that they're older ones, but the panels are actually 240 hertz native. So if you send it a 120 hertz signal, you could still turn on the BFI to have that. Is that about the correct explanation to it?
Kind of, but not entirely right, because it's not actually
Okay.
240 hertz. It's what
Mhm.
it is that, so say this is your, I don't know how to really explain this without drawing it, but basically, your monitor's here, right? I'm going to draw the
Mhm.
monitor here. It's scanning out a window this large when you've got BFI on at 120 hertz. When you turn
Mm.
BFI, so say if BFI is on high, it's scanning out a window which is 33% of the screen height. It's not really exact, but this is basically what it is. It's scanning that out over the screen with OLEDs. With LCDs, it's totally different. It's a totally different thing with LCDs. It's basically flashing the backlight. But with
Okay.
OLEDs, it's scanning it out like this. If you turn BF on medium, the window now becomes 50%, So it's scanning out a window that's 50% over the screen at 120 hertz, right? If you turn it on low, it's 70%. It's scanning out a window that's 70% of the 1080p over the window. Basically, it's kind of like that. It's not a window with a perfectly sharp edges. It's kind of like a Bayesian kind of curve, like, it's a little dark and it gets brighter and darker, and that's how it scans out across the screen, or at least when you're sampling it with a camera.
So
But
essentially,
that's
for those OLEDs, it's running very similar to Blurbuster's CRT Simulate BFI, where it's only, instead of doing one full on, one full off, it's just scanning it down the screen like that.
Yeah, like, it's kind of like a CRT. When you have an OLED with a very high BFI on, like the LG C1s, which are one of the few ones, even the Sonys that are based on the same panels as the LG C1, on their highest motion clarity setting, they still only have 50%. So you can't get 16:9 content to work with no ghosting without dropping your brightness down and using the glasses to cut it off. But
Hmm.
the LG C1s and CXs have the best, like they have the equivalent of 360 hertz
Jeez.
for motion clarity when you turn
Right.
BFI on high on 120 hertz. And this is why, like, I could be wrong about this, but I think they're artificially market segmenting because they realized that these TVs were so good at motion clarity that if they wanted to sell LG like gaming monitors, they needed to kind of get rid of the 120 hertz BFI. Because a guy I bought one of my units, and he had an LG C2, and I told him I think that they're restricting the BFI in the firmware on, it's called the Tcon board, which is the board which actually drives the panels, as opposed to the actual board which has the firmware for the TV software. And he said he didn't think it was the case. So he put a C1 main board into his LG C2, and lo and behold, the BFI 120 hertz came back and worked perfectly fine.
Oh, wow.
So it is in the software. It's not in the firmware of the Tcon board that's in the monitor. And so basically, if you were able to hack the firmware on these LG C2s, C3s, C4s, I think you would be able to get back 120 hertz BFI. I think they've just stripped it out because they want to create market segmentation. That's my theory, at least. So
Wow. There's a lot of things that when I did my kind of deeper dive review of the C4 that I didn't quite understand, so I didn't touch upon it too much because I don't
yeah,
like to talk with confidence unless I actually know the answer. But there was
yeah.
a bunch of stuff where I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Maybe I'm just not smart enough to understand it, which is fair. But that would certainly explain it. Just simply,
Like, why'd
that
they
they're
remove
trying
it,
to,
right? And a lot of people, like,
yeah,
I follow some guys, like there's some other channels on YouTube I follow, and they are always nagging these OLED TV manufacturers, put back the 120 hertz BFI, like put it back
yeah,
in. Why'd you get rid of it? But anyways, I think since they scrapped that, basically you've got to the only the best option now that we don't have 120 hertz BFI on OLEDs, if you're going with an OLED, is to get a 240 hertz OLED gaming monitor, or even you might be able to do it with a 140, like what's the highest refresh rate now on some of the newer OLEDs? Is it 164? What's
for
it?
TVs, it's 144. And then
Okay.
for gaming monitors, it's whatever the native thing is. But I'm
360
actually
or
borrowing an LG monitor that has it's an OLED that's 4K 240, but it also runs in 1080p 480. And there are 0 BFI options in the menu in the firmware.
so
So
what
it's
you need to do
maddening.
is you need to use that what's that reshade plugin that lets you put the CRT simulator stuff, right? Like,
Yeah, the
you know,
Blurbusters thing. Yeah.
yeah. Like, and this is what I've been using Wibblewobble. I was testing this to see if I could get it working with the Wibblewobble tool. So basically, Wibblewobble, for your audience, is a tool which was developed by a guy who, I guess, he used racing sims and 3D glasses with monitors. And specifically, he was using OLED monitors, which I believe were operating at 240 hertz. And because of that, he could simulate BFI by making every other frame a black frame. And
Hmm.
because of that, he basically made this frame sequential system where it would take the left and right images and it would put them up, and then it would put a black frame in between each one. And during that black frame, that meant that you had, you didn't have to worry because it would scan out the image once completely, and then it would scan out a black screen. And when you could transition the glasses during the black screens so that you would only ever get the correct left and right eyes to your eyes. So that's where I'm really excited. I'm really excited. Once we get, I would say, you really need above 90 hertz for the 3D to look right. So
Yeah.
if we can get 180 hertz OLED TVs without BFI, then I think we're going to be good to do 3D again. Um,
Interesting.
I think 144 could work. So I would be keen to actually
It
send you
could,
one.
but there's still gonna be a little bit of flicker because of the way 24 so anybody that has the older plasmas probably had a
Yeah.
mode where you could actually run it in 48 hertz, 72 hertz, or 96 hertz modes. Or if you watch the stupid video I did, then you'd see that as well. But 48's unwatchable. 72 does flicker. However, if you're watching really old movies, it actually gives you a sense that you're kind of watching it on a projector, especially if you have a modern
Okay.
projector. Gives you the sense of a film projector, but it's not for modern stuff. I mean, you could, but
Yeah.
whatever. But 96 is the sweet spot. And I personally cannot tell a difference between taking a 24p cadence in 96 or 120 or 144 with not talking about BFI, just how many
Yeah.
times is the frame shown. I think 96 and up are basically the exact same. So if you
Right.
could get it to 96 hertz per eye, then that would be the sweet spot for the proper cadence. And if you go even higher than that, you could implement the BFI into it so that you could have it match the eyes, correct? So
Yeah.
that way,
Yeah. Yeah. Like I that's for me is if you have, for me, if you have the 96 hertz, you got 48 hertz per eye, and then you've got the BFI stuff in there taking up the other 96 frames, right? So you'd have 100 and I don't even know, it would be like 180 something, 180 something
Mhm.
frames per second is what I think you're going to need on a native OLED without BFI to get 3D working acceptably. Um,
Mhm.
but I think we're getting close though, because I've heard some of the newer ones are going to have 160 something frames per second. So, you know,
Yeah.
but
240 hertz is going to be, it's inevitable, right? At some point in the next couple of
yes,
years, we're going to start to
yeah,
see the higher end OLEDs, the TVs, not
yeah.
monitors, hit
And once
240.
we got 240 hertz OLED TVs, it's going to be game on again. So I'm really excited about that.
And from that perspective, you should be able to just get a PC and a kit like yours and be able to just plug it right in, run it at
Yeah.
240 hertz, and have it just work.
Yeah, like I think once we've got 240 hertz TVs and they're commonly available, there'll probably be some much more professional solutions that start coming out. Like similar to my kit, there's currently two other people who produce similar systems to what I've got. That theirs are closed source and they sell them, but they sell them for a comparable price, slightly more, I think. Um,
Mhm.
but basically, it's the same issue. They can't guarantee it'll work on certain. The displays are all different, and it's very hard to figure out what's going to work and what isn't going to work. And yeah, so like I've had a lot of good success for some reason with some of the Sony LCD TVs, and I was kind of shocked. But one of the beta testers, let me just look up which model it was so that your audience will know.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
which one was it? It was a
I wish I had the budget to test all these different TVs. I wish I could just or spend a week up at the ratings lab in Canada and just
Yeah,
fly out
exactly
over there
right.
and start testing.
Yeah, I've petitioned them to include polarization angle as one of the things that they should check on the monitor's front of the display. They told me they weren't going to do it though. But anyways,
Uh,
the Sony X95K, which isn't an OLED, I do not believe, but that one is I think they call them LEDs or something because they've got these LED micro backlights or whatever.
Micro LEDs or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and the guy was able to get that working really good. So if you're so the key is if you actually go to the ratings.com website, um, you can click and you can look at. There's a few things that you need to check to see if your TV is going to work. Basically, what they are is you want to get the response time. Obviously, if it's an LCD as opposed to an OLED, you need to get the pixel response time. So, for example, this X95K response times, I'm just scrolling down to wherever they are here. Um I think they were pretty good. I'm just trying to find them. Is this before the era where they included response times? No, here we go. So 80% was four milliseconds on the this particular
The
TV.
Sony.
Yeah, on this Sony. Yeah, yeah, and 100 was 9.9. So it's not particularly good. It's a VA panel, but it was still pretty good. But it had BFI 120 hertz, and the guy got it working satisfactorily for him at least. So I was pretty surprised by that because I thought that the 4 milliseconds would have been too. It would have given him too much ghosting, but apparently it didn't. So that's a good example where if you've got a fast enough pixel response time and you've got BFI on an LCD, it's good enough because LCDs, the BFI, it's not like a scrolling one. It's a flashing type thing where it
Mhm.
flashes the whole screen at the same time. And I actually don't understand why they don't implement a BFI where it flashes the LED backlights in a scanline type effect because they could do that and simulate CRT, and then they could have it flashing when it wasn't
Well, you
transitioning
could
the pixels. But they've
yeah, you
never
could
done
use
it.
the RetroRGB 4K Pro, or you could use the Blurbuster stuff just through a PC to simulate that. And on LCDs, it usually looks really bad, really
Yeah,
off
but they
compared.
could do it in the firmware, is what I'm saying, because they've
True.
got this. They've got all those LED backlights, right? And they could
Right.
strobe the LED backlights, so they were only turning on when the LCD, because the LCD typically scans from top to bottom in kind of like a rolling shutter type thing, right? And they could just turn the LEDs on when the image was static. You know what I mean?
You right.
And this is a
And that's something
technology
that you cannot control with external stuff.
you
So
cannot
that's why,
control it, and they
yeah,
don't do that currently, for better or worse. Like that's something, if I were making LCD TVs, I would make that, because you could make the motion clarity amazing. You could make it
yeah.
like, and it would be an easy low hanging fruit thing to do, but they've never done it. Um, but anyway, so right now they have this global backlight, which they do for the BFI, where it flashes on and off, and that actually works really good for 3D if you've got low enough pixel response times. So,
Mm.
a
So
lot
that
of
would
these,
work on an OLED then, with with external stuff, because that way you could just blank the whole thing, and that's what standard basic BFI is. It's just
yeah, like
one on,
OLED
one off.
BFI works, like we said earlier, it works a little different. Like it has a window of light that kind of scrolls down, whereas the LCDs, they, at least based on my testing, it kind of scroll. Like if you get a high speed
Yeah,
camera,
the newer OLEDs are on off. I tested this with a 960
really,
frame per second camera, and you see them draw the image the same way. So I made a video which I can
okay,
send you. It's just up for anybody to download, but each frame is numbered. So the purpose of
oh,
that is you put it through your TV, you put a high speed camera on it, which I have just a Sony DS10, I think, that runs at that speed. You can get them pretty cheap, but
right,
and that way you could take 960 frame per second footage and you could watch it, and you could see the little bar come down every time, and you see the number change. And that's how I'm able to detect 3-2 pull down with certainty, because you'd see the number,
ah,
frame number one is 3 times, frame number two is 2 times, et cetera, et cetera. But that's how I was able to test. And the C4 is definitely one
so
on, one off.
so
And in
when
slow
you,
motion, it looks like it's rolling because that's just how it draws its image.
oh, so on the so on your one, the
Yep.
C4, the BFI is actually scrolling out one full image, and then it's
Yep.
scrolling out one full black image.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so that's totally different than the old ones. Maybe that's why they dropped the 120 hertz BFI, because they're doing it this new way that you've seen on the newer TVs, and that's not
Yeah.
compatible with this technique of doing this rolling.
I think the rolling, so I've done an unhealthy amount of testing with this, and I've been working on a
Yeah.
deep dive BFI video. And this is one of the scenarios that the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know anything about this. Like, I thought I had a pretty solid grasp on this stuff, but it's way more complicated than that. And once you
Okay.
get into the rolling BFIs, that could introduce a type of flicker that's, you ever gotten off a ride at an amusement park and you're like, oh, that's fun. And then 10 minutes later, you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why don't I feel right? That it could actually induce that if you don't have it set up properly. So
Okay.
that's why having it built into the panel, just to use, like the example you were just making, so you control the exact aspect of how this is working, you
Yeah.
could make it way better than any external solution because
Yeah.
they're
Yeah. For
panel based.
sure.
But there's still a potential for headaches and dizziness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one on, one off could do that as well. But once you start to get to the rolling, I think that's probably one of the factors. But I also believe that for some of the older ones, when you had it on high, it was actually the full one on, one off. And if you just, same thing though, if you watch any of these, even with BFI turned off, if you watch it
Yeah.
in very high speed, you could watch the image be drawn top to bottom like that. So it almost
Right.
feels like the image is rolling, but it's not. You're just watching it in slow motion.
Yeah, like it was definitely drawing when I was filming it with. I had a high speed, what do you call it, machine vision camera that I used for microscopes, and it was one of these
Oh,
ones where
nice.
you could put it sideways, and you could take a slit that was like 128 pixels and record at 2,000 frames per second, and it was definitely on my TV at the time. It was definitely going down with it on, with it off, and then going off the bottom, and then coming around and doing it again, kind of thing. But that was, like I said, that was the C1, and that's the only TV I can test on because that's the only one I got. So I don't know what the newer ones. If it is different though, that's really good, because that means that when they do get these 240 hertz panels, they'll probably add back in 120 hertz BFI, and then it'll be super easy to do 3D on them because you'll just use 120 hertz with BFI, and it'll actually have those perfect black frames in between. So the shutter glasses will turn on and off perfectly, and you won't need to worry about having a little bit of ghosting at the top and the bottom, which is what happens right now. You still get ghosting, even with my system with 120 hertz BFI C1s. At the very top and bottom 5% of the screen, there's still a tiny bit of ghosting where you see the other eye's stuff, unless you turn the brightness down by using the glasses to restrict the time interval. So
So that's actually the other thing I wanted to touch upon, is because I've been kind of pondering how to make 3D work. I didn't know anything about the polarizations, but just from the whole latency perspective. So you're a
yeah,
TV manufacturer, you just take your photodiode, you measure the latency from a standard 3D image, you lock the settings down so people can't add a bunch of filters to 3D images and increase the latency, and that's it. So the signal that you send to the glasses, you've already calculated how much latency the panel adds to the signal. And I didn't know a way to do that with external devices, but you have solved that by having the sensor on the TV itself, right?
yeah. Like so originally, traditionally, the way that this was done in the old days was when people were using VGA, they would actually put a physical adapter in line, and then the adapter would monitor the the HDM, the VGA signal, and it would see when the vertical blanking interval was, and it would use that to trigger the shutter glasses.
And
And
since there's no
then,
latency on the CRT, you didn't have to worry about if the CRT was slowing the image down, because it
right,
couldn't.
right,
It could only
exactly,
draw one
exactly.
way.
And then the newer version systems they had with HDMI, I actually have one for HDMI 1.4, which will do the 720p 120 hertz 3D content. Where what they did is they would sit on the HDMI line, and they would wait for the vertical blanking interval, and then they would use that to trigger the glasses again. But they would offer you the ability to tune the delay in the firmware, which is
Mm.
similar to what I do. You let them tune the delay, and you let them
Mhm.
tune the interval that the glasses are open. And that's how you do it. The issue I had was, in order to do 120 hertz 1080p, there are no affordable FPGAs that you can get, which you can use to intercept the HDMI signal to figure out when the vertical blanking thing is. Like, this is a big problem because there's a lot of these devices like HD Fury, which has a 3D version with a special 3D firmware, which will take frame packed 24p 3D content, and it will send it frame interleaved at 720p 120 hertz to a capable 720p 120 hertz display. But they don't support sending it to 1080p 120 hertz displays because the pixel clock rate is too high for HDMI 1.4. And there's no FPGAs that exist that are affordable, which support a high enough pixel clock rate and this 3D frame packed input. So there's no device that did what I wanted, which was to to generate the shutter signal, and to also take, whatever side by side frame packed 3D content and deliver it to my LG OLED at 120 hertz 1080p. The only thing that can do it is a PC or a $5,000 special HDMI multi display device, which costs a bundle and is totally overkill for any purpose like this, right? But anyway, so the way I did it in the M was I just settled on putting these little optical sensors in to monitor what was on the screen, because that was the only way I could trigger it from the hardware itself. The only other way to do it is to do it from the computer, which requires the computer to output a timing signal to the device to synchronize the glasses. But it has to do that precisely when the VSync is happening on the computer. And when I tried to figure out how to do that, I could not find a way that would reliably do it in a fast enough way over USB to the microcontroller I was using to get good timing. So I had to settle on using these optical sensors. Subsequently, though, one of my beta testers actually used I think it was a Raspberry Pi, not the full unit, but one of their microcontrollers. And he was able to get it to sync properly and actually output the LED signals for the IR LED signals for the glasses from the computer at sufficiently precise timing. But it's very difficult to get the timing to be reliable coming from a computer. And the glasses have very specific firmware. So, most of these glasses are expecting a very reliable timing signal to be coming in, which doesn't have jitter. So the jitter, it's like, for example, the default firmware for these Panasonic glasses, if there's more than, I would say, I'm guessing maybe, how many microseconds? 100 microseconds of jitter, they won't sync. They'll just not turn on. And that's why when I was doing it with these light sensors, I was getting more than 50 microseconds of jitter, because the timing for the actual LEDs coming on and the brightness reaching the threshold required to be detected as a trigger wasn't that precise. So I initially had to make a custom firmware for the glasses so that I could turn them on with more jitter, which doesn't sound like a good thing, but it was the only way I could get them to work with it properly. Subsequently, I found that if you actually average the signal over multiple frames, you can eliminate most of the jitter and you can get it to work with the default firmware for the glasses. But another problem comes up, which is that when the computer drops a frame, the eyes will invert.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Because, and this is a very big problem with software, software frame sequential 3D, because traditionally, if you're using something like, what do they call it? Quad buffer OpenGL, they basically have 4 back buffers, 2 for each eye. So they're preparing one left eye while they're showing one left eye. They're preparing one right eye while they're showing one right eye. And they can flip these as fast as they want. They're writing the left eyes. And they don't need to worry about what they're writing in the back buffers. But when you're doing 3D on a system that doesn't have quad buffer 3D, which is most systems other than 3D Vision or quad buffer OpenGL, you only have 2 back buffers and 1 front buffer. And that means you've got to be pushing out 120 hertz stable. If you drop 1 frame, all of a sudden your eyes flip. And all these different glasses have different firmware. So, for example, these Panasonic glasses, when the eyes flip, they take about 30 frames to flip the eyes back, which is a really terrible experience because depending on how fast your computer is, the eyes can flip quite frequently. So, like, I've managed to get with Pot Player and even with my software, I can get it so it only drops a frame on many systems once every 3 minutes. But even once every 3 minutes, if you've got to sit through your eyes going backwards for, 100, 200 milliseconds, is not very enjoyable, right? So that was the other reason I really wanted to rewrite.
It's a noticeable blip. It's a noticeable glitch blip on the screen, but it's not like if you're watching a movie that has some frame damage on it, like you've transferred old magnetic tape. It's not that, because your eyes feel like the polarization is flipping. It's way more jarring than that.
Yeah, it's like everything. It's like the world's been turned inside out, quite literally. Like everything that should be far away from you is now close to you, and it's like really jarring. Yeah. So that was another obstacle. Like all the different glasses have different intervals. So, for example, the 3D Vision ones take 2 frames to flip back. They're really quite good because they were designed specifically for this situation where there would be flips. So they needed to react quickly. Whereas these TV ones were anticipating that the TV's firmware would be delivering a reliable 120 hertz flipping, and the TV firmware was doing the page flipping for you, right? So it would never drop a frame. So they didn't need to worry about it. But now that we're using a computer to deliver it, we have to worry about these dropped frames. My approach was to rewrite the firmware for the glasses so that I could make them respond instantly to drop frames. So now it looks like you've blinked. Basically, it feels like you get 1 dark frame and then it's back to normal. But there's no way to get around that. The way the Wibblewobble guy handled it, because he did his stuff in parallel to mine at about the same time, is he actually made it so that if he drops 1 frame, he drops another frame on purpose. Like he just shows a black image for the next frame. And that way it automatically resyncs again.
That's way less jarring. That's a great idea.
Well, they both give you the effect of blinking once, but his way is a hell of a lot easier to do because you don't need to rewrite the firmware on the glasses. So
fair enough.
Yeah, and you get the benefits of having the default firmware glasses, which have some other benefits, like they're a little more stable sometimes. But so it's just there's a whole host of problems you've got to contend with to try to get 3D working on displays. And it just really depends on a lot of factors as to whether or not it'll work. So I think in your case, you mentioned you had a 240 hertz OLED monitor. That's
Mhm.
probably your best bet.
I mean, I'm borrowing that one, so that one's not going to be here forever, but I certainly would be
Okay.
able to test it out and just to see if there's a difference.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'd be really interested to also try it on the 144 hertz OLED behind me just to see what it's
Oh
like and
yeah,
see if
that one's 144. Okay, yeah.
yeah.
I'll send you a unit, and you can try it out and see whether you're comfortable. Because what you're going to be getting if you do the uh, the artificial software BFI is you're going to then be getting 72 frames a second, right? Because
Right.
you're going to have
So
black frames every other frame, so you'll only be getting 31 frames per second per eye. You know what I mean? So I
it
don't
would
know
be
how it's going to
48
do the pull
it would
down.
be 48 frames per eye, right?
144 over 2 would be 72. And then you're only
Right. Then you'd
showing,
have to add that black insertion to between eyes, right?
right, so you get half of that. Because for every eye
Oh.
frame, there's one black frame. So you get half of half. So it's like you
So
get a
couldn't it just
quarter.
be couldn't it be that left eye plays 24, 24, 24 on, off, and then right eye plays on, off? The only thing
But if you
that
do
would be
that,
though
you get more
Mhm.
flicker. Because
A
the
lot
way,
more flicker
yeah,
because of
because then
the
you might as well
24
just
hertz
run at
pulsing.
60 hertz BFI if you're going to do that.
Yeah, okay.
Because you get the same thing. You're trying to get as fast an interleaving as you can, because that's what makes your brain think that it's all happening at the same time.
Yeah, so that's something I've Mark from Blurbusters is a buddy of mine. He's very, very busy these days, but I'm waiting on a written interview with him, and I'm dying to read his explanation, which is, for the record, usually way smarter than what I could understand. But I'm dying to
Yeah.
read his explanation as to this, because if I right now, using external processors and software, take a 24p image and convert it to 72 just by playing the same frame three
Three
times,
times, yeah.
and I'm sending a, let's just say, 720p 72 image to a video processor, and I turn on 144 hertz BFI, so it's the entire 72 on, the entire 72 off. It actually looks good. It looks a little smoother than 60 hertz, 60 to 120 BFI. Tiny bit, but it looks good.
Huh.
However, if you still have it pulsing at 24 hertz, 3 on, 3 off, even though technically it's the same thing, it's strobing the entire image at 24 hertz, and it's so flickery you can't even watch it. And Mark's explanation, I'm really interested to see what he's going to say about that, because you have to basically you almost have to buffer the image and rewrite it. Buffer. Well, it would have to be 3 full frames, so you'd actually have to add a lot of latency, which for movies doesn't matter. For gaming, it would, though, because
Okay.
you have to first convert that into the higher frame rate image, and
Yeah.
then go. I'm sure I'm not explaining it right, but it's the concept. I'm
So
certainly getting.
are you explaining? So basically, you're saying that the interleaving is happening like this, kind of like with the BFI frame images, or are you saying they're
Yeah.
happening like this?
If you're doing it like that, so stacked on top of each other,
Yeah,
there's
that one makes you
much.
feel uncomfortable, right?
That one's good.
That
That
one's
one's
good.
good.
But then if you interleave them, you feel uncomfortable.
Right.
So
And
the BFI
uh,
in between the frame images.
unless you interleave them in a very specific method, so it's like on off on off on off, that actually looks great.
Okay, so
So
that's what I'm
that's
thinking. Yeah, on
yeah.
off, and that's similar with the 3D. You've got to interleave them like this at the 144 hertz. When you have the 24p images, left eye,
Oh,
right eye, you're interleaving them because this is what makes it comfortable. If you do it like this, then you feel like you're looking at 48 hertz TV.
okay. All right, so this is starting to make more sense. So for anybody that
Right.
watches a future BFI video I do, you could go back in time to this one and watch me learn as I'm going, because I've
I might
spent
be wrong, but
a
that's kind
year
of
on this.
that's how I see it with the 3D stuff. At least is you're yeah.
No, so that absolutely makes sense, and that would help. That would totally help for crosstalk, ghosting, and yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So,
I yeah.
huh? Yeah. So I guess if nothing else, my fellow nerds who are going to be interested in this might finally realize how hard this is to do if you don't just have it built directly into the panel using the chips that are probably no longer made anymore in order to have the hardware
Yeah.
locking of all this stuff in.
Yeah.
So it's way more complicated
Yeah.
than that.
You got to line up
Um,
all your ducks. It's like you've got so the three things you've got the polarization angle. You've got to get glasses, which sync properly, and then you've got to get a TV which has low enough persistence time, but also a period of time where the image is static long enough to open the glasses. And it's like OLED has some benefits, LCD has some benefits, but the LCD benefits only come if you can get a response time that's low enough. And the OLED benefits only come if you can get a refresh rate that's high enough or a BFI that's high enough that you can have that interval. So it's like you pick and choose, right? Which one? But
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you tried this at all using CRTs? Because while a CRT projector
Oh,
would be amazing, but
it'll definitely work.
yeah, because I have a couple of CRTs right here that will definitely do 720p 120, probably higher than that. But
no, this
and
technology
I
was
know,
made for CRTs. Like these shutter glasses were made with CRTs in mind. The only thing is the newer ones may not run at a slow enough frame rate for you. But if you can get ones that run at a slow enough frame rate, then, or if you can run at 1080p 120 hertz, then you'll be gold. It should work perfectly fine.
yeah, that's actually what I was getting at. Is could we take your kit, and even if I have to run it at 720p 120, would I still be able to try to watch a 3D
it would
movie
work
from
fine.
CRT?
Yeah, it would work absolutely fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I was buying one of your kits no matter what, but now I'm
I'll
definitely
send you one, man.
I
It's
would
fine.
love
I've got like
I'm going to do a whole live stream watching a 3D movie on a CRT just to kind of talk it out and see how it looks, because I bet it's going to be amazing.
I was so naive when I first started this. And I tried with my LG OLED and it worked. And I was like, oh my God, all you need is 120 hertz BFI on an OLED and it works. They must all have this technology. I've got like the C1, which is like ancient and like it's not even a G1 and it works so well. It must just work for everyone. So I started buying all these 3D glasses that I could rewrite the firmware on and stockpiling them so I could sell these kits. And then I started finding out they stripped out 120 hertz BFI. And like nothing works on any of the newer TVs, and it's just a headache, right? So
yeah, absolutely. That's I mean, welcome to my world. That's what happens to me many times a year, where I'm helping people with projects, and next thing you know, we hit a wall and go, oh, that's why nobody else is doing it.
Yeah, man.
So I do want to ask your opinion on just the flip side of things, because I guarantee there's going to be a ton of my fellow nerds listening that loves this conversation, but goes, I'm not going to do that for 3D
Yeah, for sure. I understand. Yeah.
It's totally understandable. But are there projectors out there that people could buy that are good enough? I'm not talking about a $10,000 projector, but
Okay, so if you want to do so for 3D gaming and 3D movie watching, right? If you're specifically wanting to watch 3D movies, virtually. So, our first question is: are you sensitive to the rainbow effect?
Let's just say yes, because I have an audience with a pretty keen eye.
Okay, then that basically means that there's very few projectors that you can use to watch 3D. You need to go back if you want low ghosting. You need to you need to go back to older projectors that have TN panels in them, like some of the older Epsons and stuff. But those Epsons are notorious for having organic, what do they call them, polarizers in them, which decay, which burn and leave marks on them. So you're going to have probably a hard time, and they don't sell serviceable repair parts for them. So you're going to have a hard time finding a projector which will do 3D that's not a DLP. So your best bet is probably to go with a DLP and to go for one which has a 2-segment color, or what do they call them? A color wheel which has RGB again, or like 2 sets of them, because when you do, and make sure it does 144 hertz 3D. So a lot of the newer Optimas will do this. And the other thing you're going to want, if you don't want that green tint that you talked about,
which drove me insane.
So the green tint is caused by DLP link quite often, because what it's doing is it's pulsing this light as bright as it can for about, I think it's 150 microseconds every frame. And that's what it's trying to sync the glasses on. And they actually have a lot of the projectors by Optima. They may be removing this in their latest 3D capable projectors. So I apologize if you can't find a new one that does it. They have a thing called a 3D sync port, which is a mini DIN 3 port, which has 3 pins on it. It's round. And it basically lets you plug in a sync unit to the back of your projector. And this will let you, like my device, the open source device I have, it has instructions for how to solder the connector on and use that to drive your glasses with. You can also buy units online that are pre-made that do it. And what that'll let you do is it'll let you turn off DLP link so that you don't get that pulsing of the back of the whatever the light source is in the projector causing the glasses to sync. So the colors will be much more natural and it won't pulse the light. But then you can sync your glasses using IR or you can sync them using RF by using that sync line cable connected to the device you're using to drive the glasses. And that's
Because
what
I
I
also
would
get a ton
recommend.
of dropouts on my BenQ LCD projector where the glasses would desync and resync, and very often they would resync with the eyes reversed, so I'd have to hold the
That
button down on the
that is
top.
the really bad thing about DLP Link is that for whatever reason, even though they can tell which eye is the left and the right eye, most of the glasses manufacturers don't actually include that in the firmware of the glasses. They just force you to press the button. And DLP Link is actually pretty bad like that, I find. Like, I have a projector downstairs which doesn't have a sync port on it.
Mhm.
It only has DLP Link. So what I did was I made a device that sits under the projector, right below where the ALR screen is. It gets the maximum brightness, and it monitors. I put the firmware up on my GitHub so people could make one if they wanted. It monitors the projector, gets the light, and relays it through IR or RF to other glasses that aren't DLP Link glasses. Um,
Hmm.
and that's one workaround you can do. There's other devices you can buy that will do this. They cost like $800 though because they're specialty products. But anyway, so my recommendation is to get a projector that has the mini DIN 3 port on the back, and then buy an adapter or make one which will drive your glasses so that you don't have to use DLP Link if you don't like whatever the green, blue, white hue. Um, the the other thing to be cognizant of is I would recommend trying to get a projector that does 144 hertz because the
Mhm.
faster it's flickering means the color wheel's spinning faster, which means you're less
Right.
likely to notice the rainbow effect.
Okay. That makes
See,
sense.
yeah. So I actually, like I said before, I bought an Epson. I think it was an EH 500 ultra short throw projector, a used
Mhm.
one, and my intent was to use it for 3D. But it had such bad crosstalk because of the VA LCD panels in it that I just couldn't use it. So what I did was I thought, well, I wonder if I can make a modification to the projector. So what I did was I put a device in the projector between the laser driver board and the main board, which monitored the signal to drive the lasers for the projector. And it would pulse the laser light in sync with the frames that were coming in. And I thought, well, maybe I could, similar to how BFI works. And I made it tunable so you could put the BFI, it was like putting BFI on a projector, a laser projector. And it worked really well with laser projectors because you can pulse laser diodes really quickly without worrying about anything. Whereas with, xenon arc lamp projectors, you can't pulse the backlight. It's on continuously, right? There's no
Mhm.
way to really, you'd need to physically block it, right? But I spent all this time, I spent like, maybe 20 hours making this man in the middle device that you could put in line with the main board and the laser driver. And then it turned out that even with pulsing the backlight, it wasn't good enough. I couldn't get rid of the ghosting because the VA panel was just too slow. The response times were too slow. And, so I looked into JVC projectors to see if they were better because they claim to support native 3D, but they also have a VA based panel which has a pixel response time of like 5 milliseconds. So I
Mhm.
can't imagine that 3D is much better for them either. So I don't know. So you're really stuck with DLP. Or if you're interested, if you buy two projectors with a laser backlight, you could use the device I made, the hacked device, for putting in line with the laser back. And you could actually have two projectors and you could flicker them really quickly. But if you're going to do that, you might as well just buy polarizers and use
Right.
polarized 3D glasses because, you know, you've already got two
Right.
projectors. So
Yeah. That's actually, from a cost perspective, it might actually be cheaper to get, two cheaper projectors and
I,
just have your software split them to each and then put a polarizer over the lens and then have the polarizing glasses
yeah.
on. That might
The
actually be cheaper.
if you're going to go that route, it forces you to rip all your movies though, because there's no physical hardware device which exists that can take frame packed. I could be wrong about this. There may actually, I think HD Fury 3D firmware edition will let you do it. I think so. You may actually be able to do it with that side by side. I think it'll take frame packed and convert it to side by side.
But at the lower resolution still, right?
No, that'll do full. That'll do full resolution. It's only when you try to do the 120 hertz 1080p that it can't do it, because it can't drive a fast enough pixel clock rate to do that. But if you're doing 24p, 1080, 24 hertz, 1080p, 1080p side by side, that still only uses like 150 megahertz pixel clock. So it's totally fine for HDMI 1.4 device to drive that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that there were proprietary kits that weren't open source like yours, that people are selling for this. So what is the difference in those? How do those compare
so
to the
I'm trying to remember
contrast?
the names of them, because I have the names here. Actually, I can tell you what they are. But so one of them was made for Android OLED, what do you call them? Tablets specifically, and it was called. I'm just trying to find it here. 1 second. It was called Hollow Shader, and it's called Rekindle 3D. And basically, what it was is it was a device you would attach to your tablet or Android phone, and it would do exactly the same thing that I'm doing with my device, except it would do it using the VSync signal from the Android display stack, and it would basically send out a USB signal to his dongle, which would then send out an IR LED signal which mimicked the DLP link signal to drive DLP link glasses.
Gotcha.
And I read the reviews for his, and it's basically what I would expect, which is that it only works for about 20 to 30% of the people, because it requires a very specific OLED setup to work properly. And even if you have an OLED, you have to tweak the timings to get it to basically turn the glasses on and off at just the right time to minimize the ghosting. And if you don't do that, or if your tablet or phone isn't capable of doing that, then you're going to get subpar results and you're not going to like it. The other unit that I saw was called, it was by a guy in Singapore, and it's called, I don't know, he doesn't have a name on his site, but it's called gradientsg.com is the site, but I think he's sold out. I can't remember if he still sells them. But his does a similar thing to mine once again. He drives it with, I think he uses RF or IR. So he also supports the RF 3D protocol, but he does it only for PCs, and he drives it via USB signal coming from the PC to the glasses. But I don't know if he supports video or not. I think it may only be for games.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's another can of worms, which is the whole RF glasses. So you've got the IR glasses, you've got the DLP link glasses, and you've got the RF glasses. Those are the general three broad types of glasses for frame sequential 3D. And the RF glasses are probably the best glasses in terms of not needing to worry about losing sync, because there's no way to physically block it. And you can go, as far away as you want, as long as you're within reception range and they maintain sync. But the problem with them is it's very hard there's very few devices that you can drive that with, because there's only one chipset that works that was made by Broadcom that has the required Bluetooth stack to drive the glasses. And they don't, I think they were acquired by another company and they still sell it, but the software is not open source. So you have to basically reverse engineer the firmware. And that's kind of on my to-do list. I've bought a bunch of these Broadcom chips to add it to my V3 unit someday to try to drive RF as well. But it's just a pipe dream. Maybe, yeah.
So slightly off topic, but this could actually be a question that might help my fellow gamers here. So you're saying that the Bluetooth 3D glasses, if I just got a $6 Bluetooth USB dongle off of Amazon,
it's not going to work.
Would not sync those. Okay, because the Mr. FPGA project, I've been annoying their engineers to try to have Bluetooth syncing so that we could play the older CRT based 3D games using modern glasses, but then that's not going to work because you need the special chip.
It's a regular Bluetooth chip. I don't know if it's technically, I don't know if it's restricted to that chip. So someone far more capable than me might be able to find a way. All I know is BLE 4.0 chips will not work because it
Right.
requires lower level access to the Bluetooth protocol stack than what's offered by BLE. So it's like a Bluetooth classic type protocol. Um,
Right.
and it's a very specific variant of Bluetooth Classic protocols, which most chips don't handle. So it needs to be a Broadcom, I think it's a 20702 or something like that, that is the one that most of the units use. And I've disassembled at this point like many projectors, many of these sync devices, and they're all using the exact same IC. I've never found a device which is using a different IC for driving the Bluetooth RF. So quite literally, I think your best bet is to probably just buy that chip and then figure out how someone's using the firmware to drive it and mimic that. Unfortunately, they don't make those Bluetooth adapters anymore to buy, so you can't really find them to buy. I did try with a Raspberry Pi. What was it? A Raspberry Pi Pico W? And there was one guy who posted on a forum somewhere that he got it working with the Bluetooth sync protocol. And he never replied to anyone for 4 years because he fell off the face of the earth. So I have no idea how he got it working. I almost got it working, but it just wouldn't sync with my glasses. So maybe it only works with certain types of glasses based on it not emulating it at a low enough level properly to work with that classic Bluetooth protocol with all glasses kind of deal. So it's very finicky. It's very finicky, which is why I've
Gotcha.
kind of held off actually doing it. I've got 200 of these little chips waiting to figure out how to use them to solder them on a board.
Yeah.
But
And the only other question that popped up while we were talking was you had mentioned the HD Fury device that could
yeah,
the convert. So what would be the purpose of that if you have a display that could use one type of 3D but not the other?
so I'm going to check this now because I'm not 100% sure if it would do the dual projector setup, but I believe that if you wanted to do this is their site. Where's their official site? HD Fury.
Because
If
I
you
guess
want,
like my question is why would they make this device then? What's the purpose of them selling it? Is it just so that if people
okay,
have displays that have one type of built-in 3D but not frame sequential, you could convert it to work with that?
exactly. So originally, I have a lot. I have actually have one of these, a similar device to the HD Fury, was called a VIP Theater 3D, and it was
Mhm.
made for the era where basically PlayStation 3D and other devices would output frame packed 3D output, right?
Right.
But there were all these projectors that existed that only supported 720p 120 hertz frame sequential.
Okay.
And there was no
That's the
way to
answer.
bridge the gap. And that's where these devices came in. They would take this frame packed output and they would sequence it in frame sequential. But they'll only do it up to 720p or 720p 120 hertz, as I said before, because of the HDMI 1.4 limitation. So,
Okay.
yeah. But
So that makes sense. They designed the device just to fill the hole of the market for people who spent a bunch of money on existing projectors and don't want to upgrade their projector just
yeah,
for 3D.
yeah. But
Okay.
it only really worked for those. Like I have one of those projectors here, a 720p 120 hertz capable frame sequential projector. But all the newer ones support frame packed, so it's or they support top and bottom or side by side or whatever. So the only real use case for it now, I think, is for people who want to do a passive 3D setup with two projectors. You're going to want to double check this though because it may not actually support it, but I believe. Let's
And
see what
look,
it
I have a lot of
says.
very crazy friends that do a lot of very crazy projects. I don't know anybody that's going to buy two projectors to do this. And I got friends that spend a lot of time doing weird stuff like I do, and I don't know anybody that's going to actually do it. But the
Okay, so
theory behind it
I've
is
got it
pretty interesting.
here. It doesn't
Okay.
1080p 60 hertz display 3D output. I don't know. It's not clear to me whether or not it's going to do what I think it might do or not. I thought I read somewhere that it would do it, but it may not. So I think in that case, if you want to do passive 3D, um, dual projector setup using two 3D Fury modules and passive glasses. So basically, you got to buy two of these units now, which cost $350. And then you probably got to buy one of those HDMI splitters that has the HDCP
HDCP
stripped out of
stripping.
it, so it doesn't
Yep.
actually, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Um, So yeah, it's going to be expensive to do passive 3D if you want to do it with a standard Blu-ray 3D player deck. You're probably much better to just buy a small PC that can use Pot Player. Go get
Mhm.
some version of a on-the-fly Blu-ray decryptor, and then play your 3D Blu-rays from your PC using side by side with a video card that can natively drive both projectors. Would be my.
Yeah.
But if you've got to do it on the up and up, and in a theater or whatever environment where you don't want to be doing something sketchy, then this is probably your only option. Or some archaic. There are some archaic versions of things made by Optima where they
Mhm.
do a similar thing to the HD Fury 3D, and sometimes they go up on eBay for $100, $120. But you still need to buy two of them, and you still need an HDMI splitter, I think. So yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
I mean, that was a fun conversation to have, and I'm glad we had it. But once again, I don't know anybody who's actually going to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, I can tell. I've spent so much time researching this stuff; it's just disgusting. Like,
Yeah, me too. So that's why I'm glad to talk to somebody who has done way more research and got deeper into it, because it's
yeah,
just I think everybody listening who's been thinking about this is appreciative that you took the time to do
yeah,
this podcast, because they're all going to go, okay, now I don't have to do all of that. Now
yeah.
I just understand where we're at here.
Yeah.
So
The only area I would say I'm not very familiar with is the gaming stuff. But I will say
Mhm.
one thing I've been very pleasantly surprised with for gaming is that in the past, the only places that were really supporting 3D gaming were like Helix Mod and stuff like that. And they were doing it using 3D Vision, which is no longer really supported on newer versions. You have to use DirectX 11 and either a 20 series video card or a 30 series video card with some hacked driver. But now there's other stuff I'm trying to remember the name of it. There were some other softwares you can use to do 3D type stuff now too. But one that I'm really enjoying is VR to 3D, and also you can do it with Wibblewobble too. But he doesn't have the. So what the nice thing is these will actually take VR games and let you play them on 3D projectors or 3D displays. Um,
Oh wow.
yeah, but the only thing is that because the guy who made Wibblewobble was doing racing sims mainly, he doesn't support HMD emulation with joysticks. So if you're going to
Okay.
play sort of like 3D shooters or Minecraft or something like that, where it's a first person game, you really want to use a Joy-Con to do your kind of rotating your user. So in that case, you would want to use, I think it's called VR to 3D, because he
Mhm.
supports Joy-Con emulation of HDMI. So basically, you use this Joy-Con to basically simulate rotating your headset up and down, left and right, and you can basically play. Like I play Minecraft sometimes in 3D on a 3D projector, but if you're going to use VR to 3D, he doesn't natively support the frame sequential stuff. So you would do that with a projector, but he does let you pipe it into Wibblewobble. But as you start piping your video feed through more and more of these intermediary layers, it starts using more and more of your memory, more and more of your GPU, and more of the PCI Express uh, slot bandwidth, because you pipe it through VR to 3D, and then that goes through Wibblewobble, and then that goes through Reshade, and then it goes out to your video device, right? And every time it's going through frame buffers and back and forth potentially to your CPU memory. So if you need to, yeah, I use an eGPU and it's totally incapable of doing it properly because it requires copying it back and forth over the eGPU Thunderbolt bus, which is not fast enough. So
Hmm.
yeah, but it's worth checking out. I really do recommend if you do 3D stuff, check out, because a lot of these 2D games they have really good VR mods, and then you can then take those VR mods and run them on 3D displays.
That's
And
pretty
the
cool.
yeah, and the VR mods are sometimes better than running. I would think they would be better than running the Helix mod, 3D Vision mods that aren't really made anymore so much for a lot of games. So it's worth checking out. Yeah, because there's a lot of people doing 3D with VR headsets, and I've heard some of the guys who actually make these VR mods for games. They make a full time living off of it. Like
Hmm.
yeah, like it's their job now, and they put out one a month, and they spend the whole month basically going through fixing all the shaders and doing all that stuff. So for
That's pretty awesome.
gamers, worth checking out. Yeah,
Hmm. Well, this was an absolutely awesome conversation.
yeah.
Thank you for staying late to take the time to do this. I really
You too, man.
appreciate it.
Hopefully it
I'm gonna
wasn't too long, but
No,
yeah.
it's great. And I'm going to be doing a live stream when I get the kit, messing around with that. I'm going to do it on a CRT first because that's what my fellow nerds and I are probably going to be the most curious about is how,
Yeah.
how good it looks compared to everything else. And
I'll have to talk to you a little bit how you want me to 3D, because I make these 3D printed cases with specific dimensions based on the person's monitor. So what I do is when they ask for one, I'll ask them to measure the thickness of their panel and then the distance from the top of the bezel to the first line of pixels on the screen. And I kind of 3D print a case. Like I have it's all on the website on GitHub, so you can 3D print your own cases as well. But it's kind of designed to custom fit your monitor so that it minimizes it doesn't obscure much of the screen, and it still gets the signal cleanly. But if you're going to try it on different monitors, then we'll have to come up with a solution where maybe I just give you a separate part with the sensor so you can stick it on the monitor, and the computing part sort of hangs on the back or something. We'll have to figure that out.
exactly. And I'll just use painter's tape to keep it
Yeah,
in place.
exactly. Right, like my prototypes. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Well,
Awesome.
anyways, I'll let you go, but it was great talking to you, man, and I'll be in touch with you via email. Yeah.
Absolutely. Take care.
Yeah. You too. Bye.